talk about schools. You say charter schools, some of them are doing some good. It's very, very controversial. And I should ask you also not to neglect the concerns about police brutality and whatnot in Chicago, which is the flip side, I think, of the violence issue. People don't trust the police and all that. But let's talk about schools. Let's talk about policing.
You bet. There are upwards of 100 charter schools in Chicago. Overall, they do better. There are several analyses that support this. When they don't do well, just as with other schools, they should definitely be closed down, and they have been. There are problems, however. 2 mayors in a row, Rahm Emanuel and then Loury Lightfoot, in the 2019 teacher's contract or attendant to the contract, in a separate written agreement, agreed to a cap on the growth of charter schools. That is bad. Last year, the Illinois state legislature, which, has been under one-party rule for quite a while and has done a number of deleterious things to affect the fate and fortune of Chicago's minority communities, they approved a moratorium on the closure of Chicago schools. Now, we know that school closures have been a third rail politically in Chicago. I'm sure you recall that Rahm Emanuel, when he was mayor, closed 49 of them at one time. Less reported was that the school district's list had originally identified some 200 plus schools that met the criterion for closure. The criterion are 2 things generally. One is occupancy at less than 70% of capacity. Too many empty seats for too long. And people are voting with their feet. They are leaving Chicago schools en masse. The Black population in Chicago has declined by 1/3 between 1980 and 2020. So that should be a huge wake-up call for the way that we run this city and run our schools and the way that we don't deal with violent crime. Now, importantly, there is a state tax credit program. Some people call it vouchers light. Many people don't even know that Illinois has this. It's a good start, although in the end, we need full-on raging school vouchers. And it appears that it would actually work, that the state constitution may not actually bar it, although some people believe there's a clause in the Constitution that can be read as very strict on separation of church and state. That said, Invest in Kids is a 5 or 6 year pilot program that needs to be made permanent. If you live here in Illinois, Glenn, and you give money to a scholarship granting organization, which will then turn around and give the money to generally lower income, often minority families, so that their children can attend a private school, often a Catholic school, then you will get a 75% credit on your state income tax for that money that you gave. It's a good thing. It got approved with Democratic lawmaker support 2 times. Our Democratic governor, the billionaire, J.B. Pritzker, has tried to torpedo that program, calling it a special tax break the last time around. 2 times. The greatest lobbyists in the world, kids and parents and teachers, have gone down to our state capitol and beat back the governor's attempt to undermine this vouchers light program. So there's some hope there too. But in the end,
let me interrupt for a minute, Matt, because I'm thinking about my son, Alden Loury. I am from Chicago. My son lives in Chicago. He is actually a journalist, works at WBEZ.
Yes.
And is an editor at the Opportunity and Equity Desk. I forget exactly what they call it, but you know what I'm talking about, at WBEZ,
Absolutely.
which is a public radio station in Chicago, a terrific public radio station. Now, Alden and his lovely wife, my daughter-in-law, Adrian, who is a public school teacher in Chicago, were vociferous in their opposition to the school closing program, arguing that the schools that were being closed were vastly disproportionately in Black areas, and that the teachers were being, unemployed or kicked to the curb or whatever it is by the school closings, which are, as I understand, consolidations bringing kids into, from 3 districts into 1 school, or 3 schools into 1 school because the schools are undersubscribed. So what would you say to the liberal, Democratic voting, Black middle class, defenders of the system, members of the Chicago Teachers Union, opponents to the school closing campaign, who argue that it's disproportionately adversely affecting African-American teachers?
Sure. First of all, the teachers that work at schools that will be closed are guaranteed jobs within the system. At least this was the way it was reported in North Lawndale when this came about in the winter of 2020. They were going to close 3 schools. That was a real flashpoint. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard. This is a free market approach. This is called the portfolio strategy for urban school districts. You have a portfolio of schools. Some are charters, some are, for lack of a better term, plain vanilla, regular public schools. Then you have special academies, right, that aren't charters, but they're special. They may be college prep. There are 4 or 5 at least super high-performing high schools in Chicago that are not charter schools. Walter Payton Academy is one of them. There are others. So there's a whole range of types of schools, but you have to manage your portfolio aggressively. And the thing is, this is the hard part, Glenn. North Lawndale is emblematic of a Black Chicago community that has lost a dramatic amount of its overall population in recent decades. And then, too, you have the Chicago School District encouraging cross-neighborhood boundary migration within the school system. In other words, so your child has total freedom almost, to my understanding, to, go halfway across town to another school if it's a better school. And so schools, thin out hugely in terms of the student population. And when you're looking at dozens upon dozens, even hundreds of schools within the Chicago public school system that are operating at, anywhere from 30 to 60% capacity, and the overall trend in enrollment is down, while interesting, the 2010 to 2019 trend for charter schools in Chicago was up in terms of enrollment. You got to take a hint from the data, and you can't keep operating physical plants and paying custodial staff and teachers to operate a school, that's at 30 to 60 or 70% capacity. So it is very hard. And some parents are worried because, man, look, my kid at least found and this is so sad, Glenn, my kid at least found a safe way to get to and from this particular address of this school. We're used to it. He knows what empty lots to go through so he doesn't get waylaid by gangbangers and hassled. That is actually a real thing here in this city.
Yeah.
And it's tragic. It's one of the biggest issues at the street level that you hear about. No one really ever talks about it very much in the media. Safe passage to and from school. But, it's hard. You've got to consolidate resources when their usage is thinning out, to well below half.
Okay. I want to underscore one aspect of what you're just saying now, which is that the Democrats in the state legislature and the governor, left to their own devices, would have clamped down on charters more so than they have done, and would have rescinded this incentive that's built into the tax code for people to make gifts to support kids going outside of the public school system. But this hasn't happened precisely because the lobbying of grassroots led parents who are trying to get their kids educated in the best way that they can. They've descended on Springfield and prevented this liberal democratic reflex to clamp down on charters and other non-public school education providers. Can you talk a little bit about what that grassroots looks like in terms of parents who are clamoring for more options for educating their kids? Is it predominantly Black and Latino, for example?
There's an awful lot of that, yes. And I want to be clear, the restrictions on growth of charter schools is occurring at the Chicago city level. By the mayor.
Okay.
But yes, the proposed restrictions on the tax credit scholarship program benefiting private schools and minority families, that was advanced, the restrictions, by a Democratic governor, and it was Democratic legislators who saved the day because of this lobbying. And what is the face of that movement, if you will? It's not entirely Black and Latino, but it's probably well over half Black and Latino. These are aspiring, lower middle and middle income homes.